You are listening to the INCJ podcast, Conversations about International Criminal Justice.
Okay, I think we'll get started. I think there are still some people joining the webinar, but we've just gone a couple of minutes past 4 p.m. UK and Irish time, so I think it's appropriate to get going, and we can let more people in as they enter the waiting room. So hello and good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, wherever and depending on where you are. A big, huge welcome to everybody on behalf of the International Network on Criminal Justice and to today's international webinar on implementation science in criminal justice, the probation experience in Europe. My name is Vivian Geiran. I'm a fellow of the Probation Institute and a former director of the Irish Probation Service. I'm also delighted to see such a wide and diverse audience joining us from a range of different jurisdictions. So this event brings together practitioners, researchers, and policy thinkers and makers to explore a question that sits at the heart of effective criminal justice systems. How do we ensure that the best available research is not only understood, but meaningfully applied in real-world settings? In particular, today we focus on probation, an area where the gap between evidence and practice can have very real consequences for individuals, communities, and public safety. Implementation science offers us a framework to better understand that gap. It helps us to examine not just what works, but how and why interventions succeed or fail when introduced into complex frontline environments. And today's discussion will look at how these ideas are being developed and applied across Europe, drawing on experiences from Ireland, Romania, and Slovenia in particular. Our aim today is not only to showcase innovation, but also to engage honestly with the challenges, the organisational, cultural, and practical barriers that can make implementation difficult. By doing so, we hope to support a more grounded and realistic conversation about what it takes to embed evidence-informed systems in probation. Throughout this session, you will have the opportunity to hear from leading experts, to reflect on your own practice, and to take part in an international exchange of ideas. So whether you are working in policy, practice, or research, your perspective is an important part of this dialogue. I also want to mention that this webinar is the first in a series. We will continue the conversation on implementation with an American perspective session in June, followed by a roundtable discussion later that month, where we can reflect more deeply on the themes emerging from these events. In terms of the practicalities, the webinar will last for about an hour and a half or so. We're flexible in terms of when we finish, and hopefully we'll have a full and fruitful exchange over that period of time. I would ask people to keep your microphone muted, particularly while speakers are making their presentations. If you have any comments or observations or questions as the event proceeds, please do log them in the chat Q&A facility on this platform. But we'll also have an opportunity at the end in the Q&A session for people to join live. So do keep in mind and let us know if you have any questions or comments. We plan to let all the speakers make their presentations in succession, and then allow some time for the Q&A discussion after all of the speakers have spoken. And of course, do bear in mind that this is just the first in a series of 3 events, and I would invite you to check in with the INCJ, the International Network on Criminal Justice website and social media for more information on this and other events. So our speakers, I will similarly introduce the 3 speakers in one go now, and then individually as they make their presentations. Our first speaker is Professor Ioan Durnescu, a fellow of the Probation Institute and professor at the University of Bucharest in Romania, in the Faculty of Sociology and Social Work. Our second presenter is Michelle Richardson, who is an Assistant Principal Probation Officer and the lead for learning and organisational development in the Irish Probation Service. And our third speaker is Dr. Daniela Mrhar-Prelic. Apologies again, Daniela, if I'm yet again mangling your name. Daniela is director of the Slovenian Probation Service. So our first speaker now is going to be Ioan Durnescu. Ioan has recently been attending the World Congress on Probation and Parole in Bali, Indonesia, and has had a travel delay, not from Bali in Indonesia, but from Liverpool back to Romania. So we have recorded Ioan's presentation. He very kindly recorded it yesterday. I'm still hopeful that Ioan may join us at some stage, if he can at all. But for the sake of his presentation and us having it to make it available to you, it's a recorded version. And Rob now is going to facilitate that presentation from Ioan being shown.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be here with you, although not in person and not necessarily live. It's a pre-recorded video because I have some issues with my agenda and my flights and everything. This is what happens nowadays when you fly quite a lot. Nevertheless, I will try to connect with you and answer some questions, if any. My aim for today is just to share with you some of the experience I had with the implementation science in a very important project that I ran in the last few years in Slovenia. But for that, I would like to share my screen just briefly. Just to provide a little bit of context for that experience. So my presentation is called From Training to Transformation, why knowing it's not enough and what to do about it. That's the kind of main one to get across. And I would like to start my presentation with a story that I think a lot of us is familiar with. It's about the program Reasoning and Rehabilitation that was developed in Canada in the mid-80s. One of the first structured cognitive behavioral programs with offenders. Initially, it was piloted in Ontario, in Canada, and showed significant reduction in rearrest and incarceration rates, especially among high-risk offenders. But later, after it was rolled out throughout Canada, and especially after it was mainstreamed in England and Wales, several impact studies demonstrated that actually the reduction is not so significant, especially the studies in 2003 produced quite mixed conclusions. It was especially the research conducted in the prison context and later on in the community context showed that the results are not always very straightforward. However, some meta-analysis in 2006 in particular demonstrated that actually in some conditions we can speak about 14% reduction in the recidivism in most of the studies. However, as we can see, there is quite a lot of talking about the same program, but the impact on the offender population was quite different in different places in different contexts. A lot of evaluators suggested that actually there were some problems related to methodology, related to risk matching, and the level of completion or completion rates among offenders. Moreover, it seems that as the program was rushed into mainstreaming, this kind of expansion meant limited supervised practice for many facilitators. Monitoring systems were developing rather than embedded in the implementation process, and therefore delivered different levels of quality. The ongoing supervision and booster support were inconsistent across sites. So this led most of the evaluators conclude that actually the program is good, but the implementation needs to be more carefully considered. And here we go to what we call the 10% problem that we saw also in the training programs. And there is a study, a very famous study in 2002, Joyce and Showers, that demonstrated that actually pure training with no follow-up, no transfer, no supervision after the training can lead to retention or active use of the new skill around 10% of what they learned, no more. In order to increase that up to, let's say, 85%, supervision and coaching and mentoring should be added in the designs. We know that already from in Slovenia for the whole organization of probation service, looking at both training and implementation. And what we did actually was that in the first phase, we trained the probation officers. Then we trained two coaches from each probation unit across Slovenia. Supporting the practitioners to transfer the skills, the new skills into practice. Then we also had refresh training. We had also supporting mentoring sessions every month and so on. But I'm sure that Daniela will give you more details about how this worked. What I would like to say here is a quote from the independent evaluation that we had from the researcher from Slovenia, who actually presented this in her final report, saying that practitioners, after receiving training alone, showed some change in their interactions with clients. Only after receiving structured training and coaching, they started to demonstrate observable shift in the use of co-correctional skills in real sessions. So as you can see, this observation was actually confirmed by the independent evaluation that we did in Slovenia. So for us, the conclusion is once again echoing the literature that I presented a little bit before, that knowing what to do is one thing, but doing it is a totally different thing. And in order to promote this deliberate and intentional practice, we need coaching and mentoring and support for the practitioners to transfer this into practice. By the national implement work on the first we did some exploration work, assess the field of the staff, what works for whom, and so on, and then we delivered the training to the probation officers. We discussed about the process. We decided about how the skills will be implemented into practice and what frameworks are in place for the practitioners to be supported, but also to ensure fidelity, to ensure that the skills are actually implemented in the right way as it was planned. Then we had the initial implementation, the third stage, where practitioners learning in practice. We had the coaches supporting them quite a lot, because that was quite challenging in some circumstances. And again, I hope that Daniela will be able to share with you more about these challenges. And then, of course, we were looking at the full implementation, where the new skills became routine, and where outcomes, client-related outcomes, improved according to the independent evaluation that we contracted. It's very important to note that these four stages are not necessarily linear. They might move back and forth as staff, funding, and leadership change. Okay, what needs to be done in my opinion? existing evidence, research evidence, but also based on my experience in Slovenia and also in other places, is that we train probation officers and then to train the coaches who will support the implementation, but also ensure fidelity. Then it's very important to have every now and then a refresh training to make sure that the skills that need more support, more reinforcement, they are discussed and clarified and developed further and then supported for implementation. Then also very important to monitor the fidelity to make sure that there are some tools or frameworks to measure the way the skills are implemented into practice in an accurate and evidence-based manner. Then, of course, it was also important for us, and I think it's important for everybody to have some kind of community of practice around, to have some kind of support. We still have a WhatsApp group where everybody can, ask questions or require some support in different cases and so on. So a community of practice is always very useful to create some kind of feeling of networking, community, and shared learning. And then again, very important for us, and I think for everybody else, is to have a clear evaluation system. If you can have an independent evaluation, is even better, because they will be able to look at the whole process and the content of the program in a very objective or as objective as possible, rather than subjective or with party prees. So these are the kind of recommendations that we are thinking of to pass on based on as I mentioned, on evidence and also on our previous experience. So in conclusion, implementation science tells us that good ideas fail not because they are wrong, but because they are not supported long enough to take roots. And therefore, we think that this kind of process based on train, coach, sustain, evaluate, repeat, and so on can really provide a very good framework for advancing practice, supporting practitioners, and eventually promoting change and assistance. I hope this is helpful, and if you have questions, I hope I will have the chance to answer. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Ioan, from Outer Space. We have a second phase of Ioan's presentation now, which I think Rob is getting set up, which is a follow-on reflections on the presentation that he has just made. Thanks, Rob.
Okay, as personal reflections on my experience in Slovenia in particular, I think first it was important for me to be able to design a program that is evidence-based. I think it's very, very important that you look around and see what research is telling you that it works, and then look at other experiences in other places. And like we did, we looked at what happened in Canada, what happened in UK and in other places, and then we took the learning from that and developed them according to the context. So evidence-based, I think, was very, very important for us. The second, evidence-based is important, but also practice-informed is really key, because when we started to deliver this training in the Slovenian context, a lot of procedures were in place, a lot of habits were actually crystallized among the probation staff. So we had to take those into account and adjust the training and the procedures according to this kind of contextual factors. So like everything else, the context, the people involved in the training were very, very important in the training. The third aspect that I think it's really important when we do this kind of implementation is to have some kind of independent evaluation, if it's possible. And I stress independent because we have quite a lot of evaluations, but most of the time they are done by those who are implementing the program, and unfortunately they are not always considered or perceived by others as objective as possible. And therefore, I stress independent evaluations in order to make sure that the outcomes of this study, this evaluation, are credible for the public, for the policymakers, for the academic community, for the practitioners, and so on. So that's something that I would repeat if I would be asked to do this again. The fourth topic or idea that I think stick into my mind is the continuity and the follow-up. I think the program is very important, the implementation that we did for 6 months, but we also need to work harder to maintain this kind of implementation, to maintain this kind of procedures for a longer time in order to promote and to encourage this kind of culture of learning. I think this kind of meetings, coaching, refresh training, the community of practice, and all these kind of things together stay even after 6 months or 1 year after the new skill were introduced, just to make sure that they provide the right kind of culture and the right kind of context for these skills to flourish. And not only for these skills, but maybe other skills can be introduced using the same kind of mechanism. If the culture and the framework is there already, it can be used for other purposes as well. So maintaining these mechanisms within the organization, I think, are very useful, as I mentioned, to promote this kind of culture of curiosity, culture of growth and development. So these are the let's say the 4 points that I would like to stress from my own personal opinion. Thank you.
Thank you again, wherever you are out there, Jan. Really interesting presentation and insightful as always. Just before we go on to the next speaker, and while things are being set up, I just want to remind you all, first of all, if you have any questions, to include them in the chat function as we go along. Please do that. And just by way of responding very briefly to Jan's presentation at this stage, he covered a huge range of important points in what he had to say. And already I'm seeing very nice connections developing across jurisdictions in what Jan had to say, widely within the European context, and including specifically work that he has been involved in and observed and researched in the United Kingdom, Slovenia, Ireland, and elsewhere. And particularly it struck me in relation to his suggestions regarding good implementation, his summary of train, coach, sustain, evaluate, and then repeat, emphasizing the fact that it's an ongoing process and not something where it's a quick fix. Okay, we'll move on then to our second speaker of the afternoon. Our second speaker now is Michelle Richardson, who, as I said before, is the lead for learning and organisational development in the Probation Service in Ireland. So over to you, Michelle.
Okay, so thanks, Vivian. I have just shared my screen there, so hopefully everybody can see it. Might let me know. You can see it there. Yeah.
Yeah, all good,
Michelle. Yeah, that's okay, Vivian. Great. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to just say thank you to INCJ for giving me this opportunity to present on a project that is currently ongoing and in active implementation across the Probation Service in Ireland. And I'd like to share with you the approach that we've taken, and then also highlight some of the things that we call enablers and barriers to implementation that we are currently still actively working on, I suppose. So some of the things that Jan mentioned there very much so echo what I have in my presentation. So it's good to see some of those common recurring themes. So as Vivian said, I'm Michelle Richardson. I've been involved in this project of leading a bespoke practice model, a change in a practice model for a number of years now. And I suppose just to say that I would echo what Jan has said there about implementation taking many, many years to get to the point where we feel we have reached success. And I've certainly learned a lot from implementation science and from the consultants that the Probation Service brought in to help us understand this approach in more detail. I'm going to talk to some of those things, that the approach that we've taken and the drivers that we have that we believe are driving the change. So just a quick mention about reflecting back really to move forward. So when the Probation Service in Ireland decided that it was going to take a kind of deep focus and look at the supervision and the framework within which we operate, we really had a number of reasons for that. But we needed to sit and reflect, and we needed to consider how has probation supervision been managed for many, many years in an organisation that has existed, really and grown exponentially since the 1960s to play a vital role in the criminal justice system. So how have we been managing supervision? Where were the areas that we needed to improve? And really, we arrived at the conclusion that, just like Jan mentioned, that there was an established practice across the organisation. However, there was a sense that some of that practice was maybe independent practitioner focus, and we really wanted to move towards an organisational practice model. Okay, so probation officers in Ireland are social work qualified, and they absolutely have a level of skill and development and expertise in the areas of working with people who are justice involved clients. However, some of the practices that they engaged in may not necessarily have been standardised across the entire country, and we really needed to look at shoring up some of that practice, ensuring it was quality, had a quality lens, and then moving to that sort of whole system organisational practice. So we had to really reflect back to really move forward. And I suppose that's the starting point, I would say, when you're considering a project such as this. So we developed the Irish Probation Framework over a number of recent years, but we took a particular approach to doing that. So we needed to develop a bespoke framework. We did look at other practice models that were out there that Jan referred to, some of the Canadian models. We looked at various different supervision models. And however, after that period of examination and scoping, we felt that none of those particular models really suited our culture and how we actually practiced, how we have been practicing heretofore. So we felt we needed a bespoke practice model that was going to be evidence informed, but also consolidate the existing good practice that we had in the Probation Service in Ireland. We wanted a model that was going to be underpinned by research and evidence, but would also allow us to provide a scaffolding across the island of Ireland that was consistent and accountable, but really would support that kind of quality lens on how we practice. And moreover, we did want to move towards evaluating the probation service and probation practice to meet stakeholders' expectations and accountability. These were all kind of, I suppose, reasons or the rationale for us developing a particular a practice framework, but also not just buying one off the shelf to decide, no, we would like to develop our own bespoke model that is reflective of our culture, our history, our practice, but is built upon the contemporary evidence base and is practice informed. So how do we do this? Well, we did this by one of the first kind of top tips, I would say, is you need to obviously engage in widespread staff consultation and participation of staff. And we believed that in order for us to bring about this change, we needed to consult our staff, all of our stakeholders, not just our staff, but all of our stakeholders, really to develop a concept, a design of a new framework. We did engage we had a competitive tendering process, and we engaged a consultancy, Velia Limited, to help us design our bespoke practice model. And they then, through their period of contracting and working with us, they also engage in widespread stakeholder consultations. So by the end of that sort of concept design stage, we had a 6-stage model that was built upon and reflected and consolidated existing good practice, but also introduced some new elements of practice that heretofore the Probation Service in Ireland maybe didn't spend as much time and energy on. And I suppose that's the benefit of actually having external people come in and look at your organisation and review it to determine what bits you're doing well, what bits are working really well, and what areas of the organisation and the practice that we need to develop or build upon. So we approached the project again in phases, as most of our commentators who are implementing a project. We were mindful of scale and pace. So our model is a six-stage model, and it is a detailed scaffolding or guide for staff on how to operationalise this particular framework that we developed. Our new framework, and I'll show it to you now in a moment, is really built upon existing staff practice, their contributions to it, and we then, so our staff recognise their practice in this particular model. So our particular model is based on one of the core features of any work when working with people who are justice involved. It's based on this core relationship between the client and the probation officer. And you can see at different stages, from engagement, assessment, planning, managing change, priorities and endings, but all the way through this continuum, we are focusing on the core element of how the probation officer, the frontline manager of offenders, is engaging with the client, and then how the client is receiving that service, with built-in feedback loops and client feedback loops for the client to give feedback and to co-produce their supervision and their journey with us at particular intervals. So this particular model, as I said, was designed by Velia in collaboration with our staff. But in order to operationalise this framework, we needed to actually produce a practice manual. We needed staff to have something tangible, something visual that they could actually apply in their day-to-day practice. So this model is based on, without going into detail of it, it's based on the evidence base for working with justice involved clients. It's assistance focused. It has elements of strength and need and or. And it also focuses on, the importance of the relationship of the probation officer, their skills, their attributes, and what they bring to the relationship. So, having developed the framework as such, the scaffolding, we then knew we had to operationalise it by giving something visible and tangible to our staff. But we did this not by just developing it in learning and development, we did it by co-producing this manual with our probation staff. So we have a bespoke practice manual that is complementary to the practice framework that was developed and designed with probation staff. And so when they view this manual and they attend the training in the manual, they see something that is familiar to them, that has been co-produced by them, with them, and for them. And therefore, when we introduced this across the service to our teams, we got a significant amount of buy-in. We got a significant positive feedback from our staff, who are both established practitioners for many years and our new staff. So the product of the operational product of the framework was a practice manual. And the practice manual was about essentially supporting quality reflective practice. That was a core feature of our new model. And I suppose we did this as I said, with our staff in mind, thinking about how they work. They wanted to retain social work as a key feature of their work. So we knew that 2 core principles were going to be particularly important in our practice framework. And those 2 core principles that we focused on are the principles of personalisation and co-production. And we knew from the probation service staff and their kind of ethos and their values that they held the commitment to social work values as something very important to them. And therefore, having probation interventions co-produced and personalised and tailored to the particular offender was something that we knew our staff group would find helpful and beneficial to an existing culture of practice that existed across the organisation. So our practice model is based on, quality. I suppose, what does quality look like? We really wanted to focus on quality supervision. We knew we did risk assessments well. We knew we had many years of building the knowledge and expertise in terms of risk assessment. And then, having built upon that, we wanted to look at, what is happening in the black box of supervision, as we call it? How well are people engaging with clients in the supervision process? And are there aspects of that process where motivation drops for both the client and for the probation officer? And how can we build in intervals to ensure that supervision is a staged process rather than a chunk of time that perhaps is a bit of staff would tell us sometimes it feels that it's endless, it's a drift, it's a grind. When you're working with people who perhaps maybe do not want to work with you, you need to have built-in mechanisms to have intervals to review that and co-produce that so you get maximum buy-in from mandated clients. So we really wanted the framework and our practice complementary practice manual to be built upon this positioning around what does quality practice look like? How do we give opportunities for feedback to the clients? Have we mechanisms to capture that? And is there quality markers for the teams and the manager to consult with their teams and to reflect on together? So I'm just going to mention, because this webinar is about the implementation approach, I'm going to just mention the implementation equation, which I'm sure others will be familiar with. We certainly learned about this from our implementation expert who worked with the implementation team here in Ireland, Eleanor McClory, and she shared the importance of paying attention to this implementation equation. So this is Vixen and Blase and Van Dijk's equation. So we felt that, in probation, we had developed an effective innovation, which was our new framework. And we then had an operational version of that, which was the practice manual. So we said, this is our manual. This is a usable innovation. But how do we go about implementing it? So we needed to have an implementation plan that was designed and co-produced, adhering to those principles that we said we would like our staff to work. We knew we needed to develop an implementation plan that was reflective and engaged with our staff. And we needed to create a system change within the organisation. This wasn't just about training. It isn't just about coaching. It's about the wider organisational facilitative environment. What else do we need to do across the organisation in different areas, in corporate, in HR, in operations? What do we need to do to facilitate this practice change? And really our goal is about this socially significant outcomes, which I think was mentioned again in Ioan's presentation. So we went about developing an implementation plan, which is about implementing the model. So we had the model, we had the manual, but we then needed to use implementation science to implement it. So we developed an implementation plan with the support of our implementation consultant, and we adhered strictly to the implementation plan, which allowed us to build in systems that would allow us to reflect, have oversight, distill learning, reflect that learning out to the wider organisation, and to really be reflexive in how we were going to try to implement this. Our implementation plan was launched in between kind of 2024 and into 2025. And it was about using implementation science to say, what's the organizational fit here for us in probation? And how can we produce this with our staff so that they are ready to implement when we begin to say, right, this is go live. We're going to implement this from this particular date. So there was core components of our implementation science approach. Jan, I note, mentions implementation's kind of scaling. It's a kind of scaling and a phased approach. So we adhered to that approach, which was taking a phased approach to implementation. We knew to try and implement practice change, practice where people had been practicing in a particular way for many, many years and held that quite dear and felt that they had a professional practice and autonomy over that. We knew that trying to change that in a short period of time was just not going to happen. We knew that we were going to have to take a sort of staged approach over a period of time and instill a number of enablers and identify those barriers to implementation over, certainly a number of years. In fact, I think we learned that, really full implementation, everybody doing everything that you would like them to do is in around 60 to 80% of your staff, meaning that some people may never practice as you really want them to practice. And that's just successful implementation. So that was really useful for us to understand what does successful implementation look like, and what can we tolerate as an organisation, and how long do we need to give this? And I think Jan mentioned about the long term, the bigger picture. We're in this for the long term investment. This isn't something that's going to start and end within 2 years. So, as I said, we developed a national implementation team, which was cross-grade, and staff were allowed to apply for that through expressions of interest. And then we had representations of all grades on that national implementation team. And we knew that we were going to have we needed core components such as data gathering, HR. On the corporate side, we also needed to align our practice, our policy practice alignment. And we needed to have a learning and organisational development lens on implementation. So this required us to look at our management grades and think, what do they need? What do they need to be able to support their frontline teams to implement this practice change? And we knew that a coaching approach and training and coaching and ongoing coaching of the manager as well as the staff was something that was going to have to be implemented and offered to all senior probation officers, and then a further program for higher level leaders across the organisation, which we've just completed actually as recently as yesterday, that training program. So we wanted to ensure that we had data-informed reflective practice, because we feel that if we aren't reflective and reflexive in implementing a new change initiative, we really don't learn from the mistakes of the past in expecting people to attend training and then change their practice. That just doesn't happen in our experience. So we went about this by having widespread implementation staff engagement workshops, and tilling the soil and socializing the idea of this change before we pursued the change as such. And there's just some photographs, and this took place across Ireland, every nook and cranny of Ireland, every team, every region, corporate HR, frontline staff, all aspects of our service were invited to these staff engagement workshops. And we also engaged our staff in surveys and polling on what they felt were the best enablers and potential barriers to implementing. So our staff engaged in surveys around that. So the core components, we felt this change was going to take place in teams. It doesn't take place on senior management level. We might want something, but really the change happens on local teams. The senior probation officers, the influence that other staff have on each other. Some people are going to have more influence on others. So we wanted to have the synergy and energies of teams to bring about this change. And we knew we'd have to engage with external stakeholders to inform them of that. So we took this approach that we were going to take a team-based, not an individual-based approach to the training. And we were going to have dedicated team training team training dates, and then dedicated team and phased enablers such as communities of practice, which I'll speak to shortly. So here is our scale and pace, and you can see that it's still quite recent for us. We're still in the kind of, in terms of implementation science, we're still in the initial implementation phase. We started really small rather than thinking we were going to start taking, onboarding lots of teams. We started small with a mix of geographical regions. And then we gradually built the momentum. So we getting the balance right is particularly important. And taking too many people on, onboarding too many teams in this practice model too quickly results in a shiny new practice model sitting on a desk and on a shelf that nobody uses. And we didn't want to repeat those mistakes. So we took the scale and pace was particularly important. We knew that we were going to have to then build in feedback and reflective sessions with those staff to ensure that we captured the learning from each phase. So we went about doing that as well, to essentially then having everybody, all teams and all staff trained towards the end of June 2025. So we are hoping for full implementation by the end of this year. Now, again, reminder, what does that mean? That means the majority of people are practicing how we would like them to practice, but there may well be people who don't adhere to that. But it takes longer for some people to, to really buy into a change process. And we've really developed our understanding about that, why some people don't buy into a change process initially, and while others lean into it much more easily and readily. So here we are. In 2026, we're transitioning towards what we call a national practice model. There's an emerging organisational identity. And I say emerging because we're still in the stages of solidifying that and building upon on that identity. So we are doing this by continuing our communities of practice. So once we established our core training for frontline staff and managers, we then allocated them all to communities of practice. And Ioan mentioned that as well. So communities of practice are at the moment, they're being led by learning and organisational development, but we are going to move towards peer-led shared structures of learning. This is really about learning exchange, building a sense of community within teams and within regions for that collective endeavour, that energy and synergy around teams coming together to implement this process. We wanted to really capture learning from each phase to inform subsequent phases throughout that scaling up process. And we believed that the communities of practice have actually been a significant enabler for us to develop connections between implementation data, so some of the quantitative data we were collecting, and then the qualitative data that we collected from the communities of practice. So for anybody considering initiating implementation in their own practices in Europe, our top 5 enablers are, I suppose, to break them down, and I'm sure there are many more than 5, but just our top 5 are, you need time to implement, okay? We're time poor in organizations. Everybody is busy, and people will always want more time. But our staff told us and our managers told us they need time to implement. So what does that mean for us in senior management grades? We needed to consider the pressure points on management grades and where we could offset some of that to allow the senior practitioner to allocate that time to spend with the team to really drive through this implementation. So that meant we had to look at decluttering some roles where managers were responsible for estate management, where perhaps other grades could actually take on that role. So having time to implement is an enabler, and allocating that time to implement is an enabler. Many, many teams and managers tell me all the time and tell my team all the time they need adequate resources. And I've put the word adequate here because most organizations will say they want more resources. We will always want more resources. However, what we need is adequate resources to be able to implement any practice change or model change. Good enough is what we need to get to, rather than looking for additional resources and saying we can't do it until we get this. Because our staff are our greatest investment, and they are the best tool that we have to invest in to bring about change in the lives of the clients we work with. So they are our most valuable tool. They are our most valuable resource. So we are at it. We are, if we invest in them, we invest in them to bring about that change. Essential to embedding the learning is communities of practice. We, at this stage, we are still maintaining communities of practice. We are facilitating every quarter between 6 and 8 communities of practice, which are not online, they're in person. And we have adhered to that for lots of reasons. We believe in person for practitioners is best. And whilst there might be geographic restrictions for some people, learning and development have decentralised those communities of practice and ensure that the learning and development attend local key strategic regional hubs to carry out those communities of practice, bringing people together to exchange the learning, to reflect on their practice, happens more easily and more readily in person rather than online. And we have committed to doing that to really fulfill the implementation task. There needs to be a readiness or an appetite to change in your organisation, and our staff were willing and interested in doing that. And the other piece is the quality training and ongoing coaching. So they are our kind of ongoing enablers that we are adhering to. The barriers are kind of probably known by many on this call. Sometimes when you bring about a change, we might have a sense of maybe resistance or discord. Something new is fearful. If we had to change jobs tomorrow, we'd all be a bit worried about that or uncomfortable. So we just approach this by saying, with the support of our implementation consultant, we approach this resistance as understanding that people will have a sense of loss. They may be afraid of the change and they might feel exposed. So that's okay. And we just said, okay, this is okay. This is a change. And rather than trying to, offset that resistance, you need to lean into it and understand where people and practitioners are coming from. So we've done that. And I think we see that coming through now in our communities practice. There are challenges in terms of every organisation and staff resourcing, and in some areas we have deficits where we would like more frontline practitioners. Again, time, people, materials, you need those resources to implement. And there are some challenges for some parts of the organisation in terms of hybrid working, bringing people together in person and working around those challenges. And again, the long game, we have the longer term goal in our sight, which is the energy and time that you need your people who are involved in the implementation process and are leading or driving this through. They need energy and they need time to consistently adhere to that, because it is a long term. There's early wins, but sometimes the initial wins can be hard to see. It's a long term process that we are trying to focus on. This is something that I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on because Ioan mentioned it, and it's very simply that any implementation approach should take it in stages and engage your staff. So from exploration right through to sustainability. I'm mindful of time, so I'm just going to move to this, which is our drivers for change. So as an organisation, we are consistently asking yourself, what's working, what's not working? What do we need to do about this? Is it in our control? Is this outside of our control? So what you need is leaders in your organization that are actually adaptive. So adaptive leadership is required to really sustain implementation, to help overcome those barriers and those challenges throughout the process. You will be met with barriers and challenges, but adaptive leaders are reflexive leaders, and they might have problems identified, but they're able to think about solutions and consider and consult others and then make those changes. So your leaders involved in this project, they need to have an understanding of implementation science to sustain those changes as you scale up gradually over a number of years. You need to align your policies, and we're currently in the process of aligning our procedures and policies with our Irish probation framework. And obviously, you need to have dedicated training and coaching for your managers and your frontline practitioners. This is what I know a lot of you will know. My view is that leaders are really essential to this, whether they're frontline team leads or whether they are senior leaders. You need leaders who are willing to cultivate the conditions for change. And it's a cultivation process rather than a sharp change, to cultivate the conditions across the system for change. So over time, you see this collective wisdom emerging over time. So tenacity, energy, long-term goals in sight, I suppose, are the drivers for change. Just before I kind of come to the end of my presentation, I want to just mention this is also something that we learned over the years, is that we are moving currently at the moment in probation from a system as is, as we call it, to the system to be. So within that, we have to have cycles of improvement. So the first phase, we learned from the first phase of introducing our manual and our training, we needed to say, okay, so some of that didn't land very well. What was that about? How do we change it? How do we revise it? How do we ensure that we have key messages that are relevant so that we're not losing people at the earlier stages of this implementation process? So we are still in the process of moving towards a system to be. So for us, what we have achieved so far in the last 2 years is the probation journey for probation clients in Ireland. It is from the very beginning, from an engagement to the very end of their contact with us, has now evolved from a binary process of assessment and supervision to a multi-stage process where the client is engaged in a process of co-production and feedback all the way through their supervisionary period. And that is what we have achieved to date. The evaluation of that remains to be seen. And I note obviously what Ioan has said about the value of an independent evaluation. But we have moved from this binary assessment and supervision to a staged, multi-stage approach to supervision, which was one of the things we wanted to achieve. Keeping the implementation goal in sight, playing the long game, planned, purposeful probation supervision leading to, socially significant client outcomes. It is difficult at times if you're stuck in, barrier after barrier, but if you have leaders and teams that can keep that goal in sight, this is what you need. You need that energy and tenacity to keep going. For us in probation in Ireland, the next steps are to develop a sustainability plan. We're currently in the process of doing that to map sustainability across the whole system. And this means that we need to look at obviously the other aspects of the system around other types of staff that we employ, from community service staff to particular probation assistants. How does our IPF connect with all of the other types of grades of staff that we currently employ? And in particular, how does our Irish probation framework connect with the new case management system, which is currently in development? This is a key concern for us at the moment. And I would say that we're also concerned about anchoring the cross-organisational ownership of our Irish probation framework to in order for us to sustain implementation, so that it becomes integral to our vision and our mission and our values, and to sustain that organisational identity and to keep improving and using the learning from each phase of implementation. So I have come to the end of my presentation, so I'm just going to stop there. I hope that wasn't a sharp stop, but I suppose I was very mindful of time. So I will close my input just there.
Thanks very much, Michelle. Really interesting to hear very practical examples of the implementation process at work in Ireland. And one of the points that struck me before we move on to our final formal presenter is the difficulty for individuals and groups and organizations to change. And over the years, I've often thought that the people we work with, we expect to make very significant changes in their lives. And as if we needed reminding, listening to what you had to say in your presentation brings forward that challenges at an even wider level. But really a clear message, I think, is that as well as the process of change in terms of implementation being a long one, there is an increasingly clear pathway of how to get to successful outcomes. And it's really a case of slow and steady wins the race in creating real public value in outcomes. I just want to say thanks very much to everybody. The questions and comments and even comments phrased as questions are coming in the chat. Please continue to do that. And I am certainly keeping an eye on that. And we'll deal with all of the questions that people have when we've heard from our final speaker. So on that note, we'll move on to Daniela, who is the director of the Slovenian Probation Service and a good friend and colleague to so many of us on this call and more widely in Europe. And we really look forward now, Daniela, to hearing you share your experience from Slovenia.
Thank you very much. First, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share my point of view, how to implement different approaches. Just a brief information, the Slovenian Probation Administration has celebrated the 8th birthday just a couple of days ago. So we are one of the youngest probation services in Europe. Therefore, you can imagine that we cannot, of course, compare to Irish Probation Service, but still, Michelle, thank you for such a great presentation. It already gave me like billions of ideas for the future. Because as a young probation service, of course, we have faced a lot of challenges in developing this service, who is nowadays recognized by judiciary, especially the courts and prosecutors, which are the ones who are crucial for our collaboration and, of course, for working with the clients. So I will present how we implemented the core correctional skill approach into our practice. And as Ioan already mentioned in his presentation, I will give you also the overview of the results, since we followed this by independent evaluation. Maybe I will need a little bit of help how to share the PowerPoint. So I will do the share screen. Share screen. Hopefully you see it.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, super. So what was the need to implement core correctional skills on a whole organization with the whole organization approach? As already mentioned, the Slovenian Probation Service was at that time only 4 years old at that time when we started to implement this approach. And we were newly established service. Of course, we had a really diverse structure of staff. So we had the probation officers coming from different fields, with different experiences, with different knowledge. Some of them who already worked with the offenders, and some of them who was their first working with the offenders when entering the probation service. So this was one of the crucial anchors why we decided to do it in a little bit different way. Of course, we planned it really carefully, and we developed the idea how to implement a different approach. Initially at the probation service, and then of course with the support of Ioan, who gave us the ideas, the proposals, how can we do it, and what would be what are the things that are needed to be followed when doing it. So we decided, I was maybe one important maybe information was that I was coming from the prison service before, and I was the one who was in charge to prepare the action plan for establishment of probation service, of course with the help and support of my colleagues and team. So we visited a lot of countries, so sharing the knowledge and experience is one of the things that I really appreciate a lot. And this is also the opportunity to thank all the services, also to Irish Probation Service, who helped us in this process of establishment. So we decided that because we were so diverse with such a different background, we decided that we will involve in this education process the whole organization, which meant all the probation officers, managers of the probation units, and the top manager level, which means that I was also involved, and my team from the central unit was involved in this educational process. We decided before we were searching for the solutions that we need something that needs to be long lasting, not to be just a day or two, and then, you get some information, you get some new knowledge, and then you do what with that? We wanted the Vivian, please help me, continuity. With
continuity, perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. With among our probation officers, and of course, when you have the education and when you have trainings, you need to have time to embed this into the practice. As Michelle already stated at the end, what is very important when implementing something. And another very important point of view was that since we decided that we want to have something that is long lasting, that was also the opportunity for the probation officers to gradually introduce and apply the skills into the practice, which means that they were professionally growing through the period, and they're still growing. And of course, there is always a question, are the correctional skills only for probation officers who work with the probation, with the probationers, or can we use those skills in our everyday management process and everyday life?
I'm very sorry, Daniela, for cutting across you, but I noticed that your main slide that's on the screen at the moment is the first slide, but I think you've just been going through slide number 2.
Yes.
So I don't know if you can advance your slides in terms of...
Can you help me how to do that?
You could put it, can you put it in slideshow, like to a PowerPoint slideshow?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. Oh, you did? Oh.
If you go up to the top left of your screen, I think there's a symbol for the full slide, the slide filling the whole page, I think is what Michelle is coming at.
Oh,
and then if you do that, you can do an arrow to the right, I think.
Yeah.
I can see it on the screen where pardon my Slovenian pronunciation, but it says od začetka. Something like that is the symbol and the text. I think if you click on that, it'll go to full screen.
But I did that.
Oh.
I will do like this. Sorry, I will just repeat. So I will go here and I will click.
Ah, there we are. Perfect.
Can you?
So that's on the title slide. Yeah.
This is the title.
Yeah, but it's full screen. We see it very well.
And now I cannot move. So
can you do it with the right? Oh, there we are. That's the second slide.
It works.
Yeah, it works. There might just be a little delay on it, Daniela, when you press it.
Super.
But that's the second one. That it finishes on our correctional skills only for probation officers.
This is the second one. Thank you for your help.
Not at all.
So now you see the third slide.
Yes,
the core correctional skills, the training. So what was the way, how we did it? As said, we decided that everybody will be proactive in this process within the whole organizations, which means that probation officers, coordinators, the probation officers are the ones who are working with the offenders. Coordinators at the units are the ones who have the administrative part of work, dealing with the legal acts, the data, etc. that's going on, and the managers of the units and the high level manager staff. So we decided that we will that we will do the training step by step. So first we did the training of the staff. Then the second phase was train the trainer. Then it was followed by supervised practice. And then we decided for refresher training. So the training, at that time when we implemented this training into our practice, there were 61 employed persons at the Slovenian probation administrations. So since this is a very big group, we decided that we will be split into two groups of probation officers and managers. So the groups were very diverse from different units. So we said that they need to mix, and each group had the initial training for 5 days, each day for 6 teaching hours, which means in total 30 hours per one group and altogether 60 teaching hours. So everybody had the experience of 1 week of training, and the training was based on life experience, which means that there was not just a theory. It was something that each of us, and the highlight is on each of us, needed to put ourselves into this training, since there was a lot of role play, a lot of thinking, a lot of engaging in learning different techniques and methods. After that week, we left 10 days approximately for our colleagues to think about the training, and then we invited our colleagues to express their motivation to become the trainers. So we asked our colleagues to write down the motivational letter. Why do they feel that it would be good that they are the ones who would be the trainers? Why? Because we said it needs to come from the person. As Michelle already told, you need to believe in a change. You need to believe in development. So we search for this in our colleagues. So we gathered altogether 12 participants from each unit. So each unit had the trainers. And after 2 months after the initial training, we had a special training for the coaches, for the trainers, which was 3 days, 6 teaching hours, and it was divided into the probation units, because the education and training first started with all 12 of them and then continued at each probation unit. Why? Because it was very necessary for everybody at each probation unit, there are 5 of them, to understand what is the role of the trainer, what is his or her purpose, what does it mean that somebody will supervise, because you need to, having in mind with probation officer that he or she is being supervised can sometimes be a really unpleasant feeling. So it was really necessary to present to everybody what is the role of the trainers. So we trained our colleagues, and then it was followed by supervised practice. How we did it? We decided that each coach was assigned to each counselor and monitored at least 2 counseling sessions with the probationers. Of course, we need to have the agreement of the probationer that the person agreed having a coach in this process. And after the session between the probation officer and the probationer, the coach gave confidential feedback on the use of core correctional skills in practice after each session. So everybody who works in probation was being monitored and supported by the coaches. What was really important, and what Ioan already presented, was also the support for the coaches. When you are supervising your colleagues, you can have different feelings. You don't know how to react. Maybe you need some support, how to give a feedback that is maybe not so positive, and how to do it on the right way. So the coaches had, within all these 3 months of supervised practice, they were being also supervised by Ioan, and he followed them. They had regular meetings. They discuss about what they experienced, exchange what was going on, share their thoughts, feelings, pros and cons. So they had, on every second week, they had a meeting. They also had the WhatsApp group where they could share anything that they felt they need to share among the colleagues. After the supervised training, we decided that we will ask all the staff, what do they feel that where is a lack? So what do they still need more? Where is the lack of knowledge, of information, of experience? So the refresher training was based on the needs of the probation officers, which I think was really important because it came out from the practice, and it didn't came what we think, but it came out of our colleagues, which I think is really one important thing. As Ioan mentioned, if we want to implement something, it is really important that we evaluate this. Does it have any meaning, or is there any progress? So we asked the Institute of Criminology, Dr. Mojca Plesničar, who is affiliated with the University of Ljubljana, to undertake this evaluation. We didn't want to do it by ourselves because we said maybe we can be subjective on this. So we asked her to do the evaluation. So Mojca has developed the questionnaire, targeting different elements of the program. And these 3 elements were the knowledge in core correctional skills, the confidence in core correctional skills, and how do they use it in practice. As well, there were some general questions about their well-being, their satisfaction of the probation officers. We did it, the evaluation, we did in 3 stages. So the questionnaire was sent out before the training, before the initial training. Then after the end of this first round of training. And then the third evaluation was after the supervised practice and after the final refresher training. Questionnaires follow the same structure. The final one, the last one, was a little bit different, but covered the same question areas, which allowed that the Mojca had the opportunity to compare the result and to see the progress. So the structure was about the knowledge on working with the individuals, how to create a working alliance, how to support pro-social behavior, how do they use problem-solving techniques, how do they use motivational interviews, and how do they use cognitive behavioral interventions? Not only they use the knowledge, the confidence, and the use in practice. So this was each core correctional skills was in a way evaluated during the process of training. So I will briefly present you the progress of our colleagues in this process. So for each skill, as presented, we had the questions. So if you see, the blue line is knowledge, the orange one is the confidence, and the gray one is how do they use in practice. So on the left side, you see what was their evaluation at the beginning, and what was evaluation of different elements after refresh and training. And you can see that creating the working alliance, you see that the higher growth was in use in practice, which is very important, since this is very important. How do they use, how probation officers use these skills into the practice? Then we have the problem solving techniques, where you can also see that the progress is pretty much the same, but you can see on each level, knowledge, confidence, and use in progress, you see the increase on all 3 levels. The same happened with problem solving and using or knowing about the motivational interviewing techniques. So as you can see, there are on each point you see the progress. And the same, and there was the highest difference was in cognitive behavioral interventions, since this was the part where also the probation officers, especially the ones who were not social workers or pedagogues or psychologists, who had a lack of knowledge because they didn't have the opportunity in the past to get the knowledge about cognitive behavioral interventions. So you can see here the highest level of increase. So to summarize the evaluation, you could see that there are marked differences in answers in pre and after 5-day training, and also the self-assessment after the supervised practice and refresher training. So the overall grade about this process, how we did it, was assessed positively. 96 of respondents felt that the program answered their needs as probation officers and that they had the potential to improve their work in practice, which is really important also for us who are developing the certis to know their preparedness and willingness for a change in our practice. When probation officers were asked about specific components of the program, you could see that there was improvement at all levels. The confidence in using the skill and the actual use of this skill in practice seems to be the aspect that have improved the most when measuring, which means that maybe we can conclude that they have become more confident and have started to use more the skills in their everyday work. Of course, we are the small probation service. At the beginning, we all who applied the initial training, we answered the first 2 questionnaires. The third one was not answered by the central unit, the ones who are coming from the top level management, because we are not working with the probationers and we are not working day to day and using these skills. So we were out of the evaluation after the supervised practice, which is, of course, normal. Of course, there are some limitations because there was a smaller number of respondents. They did not reply. All of them did not reply. Some of them have already left the service. Some of them joined the service. So these are some facts that happened in between. Of course, there is always a question: did they give us? Did they answer as in a way that we would like to hear, or were they really honest when answering the questions? And of course, we can also always ask ourselves: can we use some other qualitative methods? But nevertheless, regarding these limitations, we concluded that the approach that we take, so step by step, involving first the whole organization, and then to train the coaches, and then to supervise the practice, to give the feedback, to do the refreshment training, was a sustainable model. And from my point of view as a beneficiary of this training, I can conclude that the assistance that was given to each probation officer, to all trainers, and then through the refreshment training was really important one, and the approach, how the training was held. It allowed the enhanced social integration because they started to use these skills more in their everyday life, which of course led to use more specialized skills, which means that we need to be really aware when we are thinking about implementing something. And this is what Ioan and Michelle already emphasized. When we are thinking about specialized training, we always need to ask ourselves, what do we want to achieve? What are the changes that need to be made? How we will do it? What are the obstacles? And how we will keep this also in future? So how we will keep this process, the skills, how will they stay alive? So this process allowed us to do, each of us, beginning with me as a Director General, the possibility to self-assess the approach from my point of view and from the point of view of my colleagues who are working with the probationers. This was the opportunity to self-assess their skills, their needs, their knowledge, and their practice, which means that this allows or enables, if we are doing the self-assessment regularly, continuously, then this allows us that we enhance our future endeavors. As Michelle said, and I agree very much with her, Michelle, you said, some need time for a change in the process. I agree very much, because this is what we faced when doing the training. Ioan mentioned that we faced different obstacles during the training process. Either unpreparedness of the staff, or some conflicts, or very positive reactions. So we needed to be all the time during the whole training process, which took 6 months, within 2 years. We needed to follow this, what was going on, and to evaluate this regularly. It was not enough just to recognize it. It was important to solve it when we face the obstacles, which meant that each of us, the Ioan as the main trainer, and the colleagues who participated in this process, for the coaches, for probation officer, all of them needed to adapt, to assess, to evaluate, to change in this. And at the end, I have to say that I'm very happy that Michelle presented her presentation before me, because I can lean on this. It's very important that we go into the right direction. You see here a logo, you see the circle, which is open. It means into the right direction if I translate it into the English. So it's very important what we do with these skills or this approach. What do we do in the future? It's not enough. It's really not enough just to do it in, for example, as we did it within the 2 years, altogether 6 months. It's not enough. If we want to keep this and grow professionally, then we need to repeat, as Ioan mentioned. It's really important for us to repeat. It's never enough to hear the same thing. It's never enough to reuse or re-question ourselves. Are we using the knowledge that we have, the skill that we have in the right way? It's very important to do it repeatedly, and to involve everybody who come. We all know that the services are different. People are coming and people are leaving with different personalities, with different experience. And if we want for probation service to grow, then it's necessary to repeat this, to repeat again and again and again. What we decided at Slovenian Probation Administration is that we will send all the coaches who are still working. Some of them left, a couple of them already left, the service within the years, because this training was held in 22 and 23. And it was repeatedly, so the approach of coaches and trainers is still ongoing at each probation unit. So they still use it in practice when they need, when they feel, they use this monitor, supervised practice in order so the probation officers can get the feedback, how is she or he working with the probationer. So this is a still ongoing process. But nevertheless, we decided that we will send our coaches and that we will also educate new coaches for the core correctional skills to do it repeatedly in the practice. And for the next year, we plan again on the whole organization, again, the refreshment training, because it's necessary after a couple of years to ask ourselves, what do we need? When you presented, Michelle, what you did for the probation service, as I mentioned at the beginning, the Irish Probation Service was one of the one who helped us really a lot when we were preparing the action plan for the establishment, and then when starting with the service, with educating our staff. The colleagues from Ireland came. We had the opportunity to visit Irish Probation Service. And for us who are very young, you know, we are now in a small child phase. So first we were the infants, now we are little children, and then we will one day we will become adults. We are now small children at the moment. And when we see the probation service as Irish Probation Service, it's for us the information that we did it in a good way. And also it's the opportunity not to forget that it's important to evaluate, to ask ourselves what is important for development. So I agree when you, Michelle, said that the leaders are really essential ones. And this was one of the reasons why we decided, also with me on board, to go through this process. It's also for me as a Director General important to understand, why do I need to get the finance? How to organize work, that they need time, that they need to have enough time to train in practice. It needs to be first in my head that this is necessary. If I want to have good probation officer, and if we want that this mirrors in success of our probationers, then the first step is my recognition that investing in probation staff is a must be. It's not something that we want or we would like to do. It's a must be if we want to be the successful. And from the ones who are leading the service, it's important to be aware of this, because it's on us to decide whether we will do it or not. Because if we ask our probation officers, most of them, they will say, yes, please give me the knowledge. Please let me to attend the training. Often we face obstacles like, oh, do we have time? Do we have money? How we will do it? With whom we will do it? Then the public procurement process and the bureaucracy that goes with. But regardless of these obstacles, it is necessary to invest, because only if invest time and money, we can develop, we can grow professionally, and this will be seen in a result of probationers. So Michelle gave us, you gave me a really good thinking points also for the debate. For the future, what can we do? And I would like to thank you for the opportunity to present our experience and also the opportunity to learn from Ireland again.
Okay. Thank you very much, Daniela. And really the passion that you have and our other speakers have really comes through very clearly there. We're right up against the clock. I do want to allow time for one or two questions before we finish up. But a huge thanks to Daniela. And what really came across from my perspective, among many important points, is the importance of not just training, but coaching, including the live coaching that you described. And I really liked towards the end of your presentation, the questions that you posed in terms of what do we want to achieve, how to sustain the process, and even the way you described in relation to the knowledge, the skills, and so on, and the process, how will they stay alive? And I think, how will we keep them alive? There were a couple of questions in the chat. One from David Raho, who had to leave, was responded to online in the chat by Michelle. I do want to come to the question that was raised by Paul Delaney of the Corn Market Project in Wexford. If anybody else has a very quick question, if you could put your hand up through the hand up function on the screen, I'll come to you in order. But Paul's question, if I can put it to Michelle and Daniela, is how can probation systems embed restorative justice as a meaningful relational practice, not a procedural add-on, while driving organisational change and cycles of continuous improvement? So specifically in relation to incorporating restorative justice, I think, into that development and implementation of effective practice. Michelle or Daniela? Michelle,
I would go quickly first, I suppose, just to say, I suppose the restorative justice approaches and restorative practice is integral to our Irish probation framework. So it is something that isn't outside of that framework. It's actually an integral part of it. So in the training that we designed and implemented with our staff, restorative justice and restorative practices was part of that. So I think training is one aspect. We all see that training is one aspect to implementing. People have to be trained, but it's really what happens after training in the day-to-day, in the day-to-day work of probation practitioners, where things are actually fully embedded, distilled, and the energy and interest around a particular topic kind of emerges. So in order for it to merge after training, we still provide training, separate training, dedicated training on restorative justice. It sometimes doesn't result in further an expansion of those services, or those referrals to restorative justice don't necessarily increase. So I would take a two-pronged approach. Certainly there's internal capacity building that we need to continue to do in the Irish Probation Service in terms of raising awareness around the importance of generic restorative justice practice. So it's fully integrated and fully embedded as in our day-to-day practice. And then there's the other approach that I think it's around awareness raising with certainly other stakeholders, with our public prosecutors, our judiciary, and our other stakeholders that we liaise with in the justice sector, because they need to understand the processes of restorative justice and what is the benefit of it in certain circumstances, and how powerful it can be as a justice sanction of itself in its own right. So there's an element of internal capacity building and then external knowledge, raising awareness with external stakeholders, including the judiciary. And again, in probation in Ireland, our judiciary are particularly independent, and if their knowledge of restorative justice isn't up to speed, or they don't value it as a sanction, as a community sanction in its own merit, then we won't see referrals cases coming from court being dealt with by that. So there is a judicial engagement aspect to it, stakeholder aspect, and then internal capacity building.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Daniela, have you any thoughts on that issue?
I can just share my point of view. Since in Slovenia, we don't have restorative justice approaches developed on a high level as you have it in other countries. So this is what Michelle emphasized at the end. In Slovenia, we have some methods, techniques of restorative justice. But by my point of view, there are still just the minor of them. And there is a huge lack of the awareness of the importance of the restorative justice. So I think that this is one of the challenges that the Ministry of Justice and all the stakeholders within this process need to be aware. And I hopefully that this will be on our agenda for the future development, because I see in this a huge possibility to grow professionally.
Okay, thanks very much, Daniela. I'm going to allow one final question, but the responses will have to be really, really brief. So to keep your thoughts focused, John Scott asks, politicians often want quick wins. How do you convince them that long-term gains are worth the investment? In 6 words or less, Michelle and Daniela.
I don't think you could answer it in 6 words or less, to be honest, but certainly, everything we do has a political element to it. Crime is political, offending behaviour is political. And I suppose we have to have evidence-informed, contemporary practice models that prove that they are effective, that prove that they can reduce recidivism, that they can make communities safer. And I think that's incumbent on us as providers of those sanctions to ensure that our processes and our interventions actually do reduce recidivism. And I think when we see those recidivism rates come down, which we have certainly in Ireland, on our latest statistics from our Central Statistics Office, when we see the change in the reductions in recidivism, this is the evidence. This is the metrics that prove that interventions, where they're appropriate, where they're planned and purposeful, and they're tailored to the individual client and offender, can actually reduce recidivism and enhance community safety. And sometimes it does come down to those the evidence base in terms of the metrics around reducing recidivism. We need to further develop that data to ensure that what we're doing isn't nice to have, but not effective, that it is actually reducing recidivism in communities and in long-term changing people's lives.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Daniela, have you anything you'd like to add to that point?
I will try to summarize it in less than 6 words.
Good woman.
Will, persistence, believe, change, and never give up.
I love it. I love it. Just a final comment from the chat. Liliana from Romania said, to time and money, I would add voice. And I think that's what
I agree.
Daniela and Michelle and Ioan and all of you have added today, an amplification of that voice from frontline practitioners in terms of implementation. I'm going to draw things to a close. I want to say a huge thanks, first of all, to our speakers, Ioan Durnescu, Michelle Richardson, and Daniela Merhar-Prelic. Apologies again, Daniela.
You're perfect.
Pronunciation. Perfect. And also everybody at INCJ, and particularly John Scott, Rob Watson, and Sarah Tucci. And just to remind you, today is just the first in a trio of events on implementation in probation. We have been exploring and discussing implementation of evidence-informed practice for public value in probation in Europe. And a second webinar, which will look at American perspectives, is taking place from 4 p.m. UK Irish time on Tuesday, the 9th of June, providing a United States perspective on what we've been talking about today, continuing the dialogue with insights from American practice and policy. And a follow-up roundtable discussion will take place from 4 p.m. UK and Irish time on Tuesday, the 30th of June, 2026, offering the opportunity to reflect more deeply on the themes raised and discussed across jurisdictions. And finally, I would just urge everybody, if you're not already, to check in with the INCJ website, which is at criminaljusticenetwork.net, and the INCJ social media platforms for more information on today's event, the future events on implementation, and past and future events. So a huge thanks to everybody for sticking with us today. It's been a great turnout and participation from right across Europe and the United States and more widely. So thanks everybody, and have a good rest of the evening or day that you're facing into. Thank you all very much.
You have been listening to the INCJ podcast, Conversations about International Criminal Justice. To find out more, go to our website at criminaljusticenetwork.net or follow us on Twitter at INTCJ Network.